The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those knuckleheads of liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We're coming at you on February 6, 2023. So it's a little bit of a departure for us. We have a special guest today here. He is Thomas Green, the Greene County attorney in Iowa. And he's going to be here to talk with us on a show that's really focused on Iowa, so we can hear about some of the issues of liberty and government going on in Iowa. So before we get into that, let me introduce you to our panel. In our upper left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our upper right-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. In our lower left-hand corner, we have Dr. Thomas Lane. He is the, as I said before, the Greene County attorney in Iowa, which is kind of like a district attorney. And we recently interviewed Thomas. So if you want to really hear about his getting elected as a libertarian in office, you can go check that episode out and find out more about Thomas. And by the way, James, can you bring up the visual too? I just wanted to bring up Thomas's webpage too. So there's a picture of Thomas there, and you can check him out more there and on our last show. So anyways, we're going to talk about Iowa on this show. And so as usual, I want to bring up the Cato map so we can kind of see how liberty is playing out in Iowa. This is a map that kind of shows how the different states relate to each other. The gold ones are sort of the ones that Cato is giving pretty significantly high ratings to, for the most part, I think. So you can see like New Hampshire here is number one, but Iowa is kind of in the middle of the pack. But it's interesting because even though it's sort of in the middle of the pack, as they disaggregate their rating, they think they're doing absolutely great on regulatory freedom, and personal freedom is doing pretty well there too. The issue is just that there happens to be a lot of spending going on, and some of that may be because it's kind of a one-party rule that seems to be kind of the opposite of what we're having here in California, where it's all Democrats. There it sounds like it's pretty much all Republicans, and Thomas as an elected libertarian. Just to show you how this sort of plays out on a few of the websites, it looks like they have maybe one Democrat in state office, and as far as for the federal positions here, the two senators are Republicans, and all four of the representatives are also Republicans. So definitely it's a solid red state. So that being said, Thomas, how is liberty doing in your experience in Iowa?
Not well. And I if you look at Cato's data through time, Iowa has fallen from the 10th freest state to the 29th since the year 2000. And I think your point is well taken. When you compare California with Iowa, it really reveals that there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two major parties in everything that matters. That when they gain control of a state government, they concentrate power and they grow government. And it doesn't matter if it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, they do the same thing.
One thing I will jump in on that, though, is that Cato, I think, ranks California at 48. So I think from personal experience, we definitely say we'd be, even though we'd much rather see the Liberty take a shot, but, hey, Iowa's looking pretty good to us.
Yeah. God, what are the two states? I'll have to look at that. What are the two states worse than California? My goodness.
I believe it is.
I think it's New York and Illinois, is it not? I believe
New York is 50, and I think Hawaii is
Ah,
49. And
Of,
so
of one, okay.
oh
I
my
think
gosh.
that Hawaii, maybe I haven't looked into it specifically, but it might have to do with, the fact I think they have, what's it, single payer health care there and some other things like that. So I'm not sure about all the issues there, but it's, yeah. So anyways, yeah, but sorry, Thomas, yeah, we'll get back to you on this. So.
Sure, no, of course, and we had a chance to discuss this once already, but just as an example, our legislature just enacted new school education legislation that's going to cost taxpayers more than $250 million a year to provide vouchers for parents to send their kids to private schools. And that's just a great example of how a Republican administration, a Republican-controlled legislature doesn't have any problem growing government and increasing cost to taxpayers.
Yeah,
You know, but
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I just wanted to bring up from the last one real quick, Leon, then you jump in. You had made a point on the critique in the last show that kind of an interesting insight that we haven't really thought, because we're very pro-choice generally on this show, but you made a very interesting point that when government sets a amount of money that they're putting out there, it does create a distortion as far as how much a private school then will charge, because it might be less, but if they know they're getting a certain amount, then wow, just like with the well, we see this in college funding as well. When they know that students are getting a certain amount from the federal government, boom, they spend it. They figure out a way to bring those costs up. So that was a really interesting insight for the K through 12 that you were bringing up there.
Yeah, no, there are very rare circumstances. There are some, I would argue there are some, but they're few and far between when a government agency can do something better than the market can do it. But in the vast majority of situations, market forces will produce a better outcome than any sort of centralized regulatory authority. And education is one of those areas. And as I said in the last show, my wife and I are exploring a private school for our daughter. Currently, tuition there is only $4,000, $4,500 a year, in that range. The new legislation will allow parents to pay up to $7,500 roughly toward tuition and have that covered by the state. So why would this private school not increase its tuition to $7,500? Because there's a guaranteed check from the state of Iowa that distorts the market. It frees that private school from market forces. And that's $3,000 in government spending, the difference between the new tuition and the old tuition. That's just wasted government money that's being taken from the people of Iowa.
So, Thomas, I can understand your market distortion arguments. I'm in full compliance with that. But in your world, in the, I guess, the libertarian world or whatever it is you want to call it, what would you have done about the situation of education? I mean, education, public education, K through 12 in particular, is really a national disgrace. We cannot deny that. And I'm not advocating for the federal government to get involved with that. That's the last thing on my list of things to do to correct a very obvious problem. But what would you have done that would be different, or how would you have prevent some of these market distortions that we're about to see in Iowa, and then there are other places kind of following suit in similar type school choice programs, shall we say?
I would say get government out of it. I believe in public schools, but they should be under local control. The degree to which our federal government and our state government interferes in public education at the local level is astounding to me. Our state legislature, so in addition to the school choice, they're also looking at legislation to limit what books are in our school libraries. They want to interfere with the curricula at the K through 12 level. These are legislators who are inserting themselves into our local public schools. Give authority back to local school boards. That's how parents and local people are in control. We are going to lose the capacity for self-government if it doesn't exist at the local level. Here in Greene County, our county treasurer 4 years ago won election by one vote. She beat the incumbent by one vote. One voter made or changed the outcome of that election. That's not possible at the state level. That's not possible at the federal level. There's actual meaningful control and accountability at the local level. Give public schools back to local school boards, local parents, and get government out of it. I don't want legislators determining what books are in my school library. That's just preposterous.
But just to be clear here, though, I mean, when you say getting government out of it, even the public schools as it is presently constructed, you would want the government out of that too, I would imagine, is what you're saying.
I want federal government out of it completely. I think that's beyond the constitutional authority of the federal government to have any role in public education. Constitutionally and legally, there is a role for each state legislature to set up its own public school system. And I really believe in the laboratory of the states. And you can have experimentation in different states, and we'll see what works and what doesn't work. Philosophically, I think you only have meaningful democracy at the local level. Representation is an absolute myth. The idea that there's 100 senators in Congress who are in any meaningful sense representative of the people of the United States is preposterous. I mean, it's just a total myth. And yet we've given them so much authority to dictate to the country in areas of legislation that should really be decided at the state and local level.
You know, one of the things I was thinking, maybe there's a happy compromise there in the school choice, if somehow they incentivize parents maybe with some kind of savings accounts or something where maybe some of the money can be saved toward college if they don't spend it all, and maybe that would put some price pressure back into the marketplace. Maybe there's some tinkering that could be done. But speaking of, I did want to move on to the next topic though, because when we talk about distortions and maybe sort of what's driving a lot of potential distortions in Iowa, and that's ethanol. I mean, you can't seem to get around that it is the largest producer by far of ethanol in the country. You can see this chart here from Statista, and they're showing essentially that the capacity in millions of gallons, it's literally twice as much as the next closest state, Nebraska. So it's producing a huge share of the country's ethanol, and of course a lot of these this ethanol production, I guess, it seems to be it's ramping up. Here's an article that shows that they believe they're setting new records in 2021 production, but a lot of this is driven by policy at the federal level, which is to say that, hey, you've got to put X amount of ethanol in the gasoline out there. Let's see, I'm trying to bring up the visual here. That's being a little slow for me. So this is the U.S. Department of Energy and Alternative Fuels Data Center. And a lot of that, this just shows a laundry list of different rules and regulations that they have that impact, ethanol out there being produced, and one specifically is the renewable fuel standard, and they're requiring that's like 36 billion gallons of renewable fuel have to be blended in to our fuel supply. So this is just one aspect of it. There's some other issues too with carbon capture at these places and wanting to put pipelines through places, and some of the impacts on I can't remember what that's called when they try and grab the property from the state.
Eminent domain.
Eminent domain.
Yeah. So there's other issues going on like that. So Thomas, tell us a little bit about how ethanol is impacting the state of Iowa. What's that distortion like?
Yeah, it's a great distortion, and it's both at the federal level and the state level. And again, this is another example of how Republicans are no different than Democrats in using the instrumentalities of government to interfere in the marketplace and to diminish liberty. In 2021, our Republican legislature enacted and our Republican governor signed House File 2128, which requires gas stations to sell E15 gasoline with 15% ethanol blended in, beginning in 2026. So our Republican government is forcing private business owners to sell a product, whether they want to or not.
Hey, James,
And
maybe you could bring up the visual again real quick while Thomas is talking here. So, because we do have some slides on that. This, I believe, talks about that law where they're requiring E15 to be sold. And just give people a little bit of background on gasoline. So, generally, the gasoline in the country is 10% ethanol, and it's largely because of these laws that are forcing that. And there's a little bit of a push in some places to make it E15 or in some cases E85. But there's a lot of technical issues with vehicles themselves on adopting that. But anyway, sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
yeah, and I'm not opposed to E15 or E85 if consumers want it, but let the market determine that. And don't force private business owners to sell a product that may not be profitable for them. And then because there's this recognition that a lot of our private, locally owned gas stations can't afford to replace their underground tanks and to replace their pumps, there's grant money, millions of dollars in grant money every year paid for by taxpayers to help these private businesses update their equipment. And so it's a huge cost to taxpayers. For a technology that may be fleeting, who knows how long, ethanol powered vehicles are going to be a thing. And it's clearly not something the market could independently support. And then you add in these federal tax credits where the federal government is proposing to give out billions of dollars in tax credits for ethanol plants that reduce their carbon footprint by building these pipelines that will liquefy carbon dioxide emissions. We're going to pipe those liquefied carbon dioxide emissions across the state into South Dakota and then bury them underground. That's the proposal. The ethanol plants will get billions of dollars in tax credits, and the companies that make these pipelines will get billions of dollars from the federal government to reduce the carbon impact, what's called the carbon intensity score of these ethanol plants. And then our state government's going to use eminent domain to take away property from private property owners to run these pipelines across their property. All of this is being fueled, no pun intended, all of this is being fueled by these federal tax credits. And this really gets to the root of the problem, which I've given a lot of thought to this. And the root of the problem is federal taxation policy is not primarily anymore about raising revenue for the federal government. It's about advancing social policy. And maybe federal taxation is a necessary evil, but then we should limit it as much as possible. But like these federal tax credits is no longer about raising revenue for the federal government. It's about advancing policies that do not have market support.
But
I like that last part.
Go ahead.
I just like that last part, that it's advancing policies that do not have market support. Why? Because nobody wants it.
Yeah, that's true, absolutely. But Thomas, you have previously said that you believe in the rule of law, and that is one of the things that comes out of our Constitution, and which I totally agree with. But the Constitution does not really define a very good relationship between the state and its residents. It doesn't really define that very, very, very clearly. The 9th and 10th Amendment do give us the right. We preserve all the rights that we did not give up, to be part of this experiment that we call the United States of America. But if the state are passing laws, which we as liberty-minded people would disagree with, is that any way violates the Constitution in any way?
It could, yes. There is state legislation that could interfere with constitutional prohibitions. Absolutely.
Okay.
It's funny too, because with ethanol, sometimes it's sold as a cost saver or something like that, because it does bring down the nominal price of gasoline. But like all government distortions, there's usually something hidden there, and part of the issue is you get a little less energy as well in that gasoline because the ethanol has about 30% less energy carrying capacity. But it's funny. There's some environmental benefits to it. The fact that it has oxygen built into it, but it also causes problems with the machinery, causes corrosion and other things like that because it's an alcohol. So there's all sorts of issues that go into this that make it a complex issue, but government's right there driving the train.
I'm not sure, Jason, I'm not sure about the net benefits. There are benefits, but the net benefits, I'm not sure that there are net benefits to the use of ethanol, quite frankly.
The numbers are really fuzzy because, the idea of these pipelines and the carbon capture is that it will reduce the emissions generated by these ethanol plants, which I think the science is there, that if you can capture it, liquefy it, and bury it underground, it reduces the amount of carbon being released into the atmosphere. But all of that is offset by the amount of carbon that's going to be released building the pipeline. Right. And I can't get good numbers on whether ultimately there's going to be more or less carbon emissions, depending on how much carbon is released building these thousands of miles of pipeline across the state of Iowa.
And even carbon capture in its on its own, the carbon dioxide that they're capturing and pumping underground, there are no real good studies about the long-term benefits of that, of how it's going to affect the water table and some other things from burying these things. There's no good evidence of studies about this. So the net benefits are really in question on this whole adventure.
Yeah. And that gets to the eminent domain problem because the Iowa Utilities Board under state statute has the authority to give private companies eminent domain to build things like these pipelines. And there are constitutional limits under both the U.S. Constitution, the Fifth Amendment, and under the Iowa Constitution, Article 1, Section 18, requires the use of eminent domain to have a public use. And the argument for this pipeline is the environmental benefits constitute a public use and therefore make this constitutional. And I find that argument very weak. The connection between the purported benefits to the environment as a public use and the carbon capture of these ethanol plants, if that satisfies the Constitution, then any supposed benefit to the public would justify the taking of private property from one private owner to another by the government. And that is totally inimical to our frame of government.
Indeed. Yes.
Well, it's funny too, because you can flip it with the pipeline that they wanted to bring down, a keystone, I guess, that they wanted to bring down. And the idea that, you use public or eminent domain for that as well in some areas. It's certainly, you can make the same argument that, hey, look, even if you're just using petroleum products, if you transfer it by pipeline, it's going to be more efficient, and therefore it's better for the environment than driving it by truck or some other way. So it just seems like there's an endless, argument there to get into eminent domain. Just depending upon how you want to flip the numbers around, I guess. But speaking of fuzzy numbers, I wanted to get into another topic as well. And this one kind of drives to our COVID thinking and our medicine. But there was a story in Iowa recently of a woman who was declared dead, and she was sent to a funeral home. And then they determined that, hey, hold on, she's not dead yet. and I guess the reason I wanted to bring this story up, one, it was related to Iowa, and we're talking about Iowa, but we have all these medical experts in all of these areas. And we were just talking about energy and the environment, and we have all these purported government experts on all these things. And yet when you really get down to it, you kind of wonder how expert they are when you have medical experts who can't even tell if a woman is alive or not.
And you unzip the body bag and she gasped for air.
Yeah.
But I did want to bring up a few other articles. There's recently been a lot of stepping back and rethinking about this. This one subject or article from Nature, it talks, kind of, it's more generous toward the COVID lockdown cult, in the sense that they're actually trying to say that it's just some sort of more minor errors in the counting that they're admitting to. But we've seen much bigger errors. There was an article in Newsweek where it said, "Look, it's time for the scientific community to say, hey, we were wrong about a lot of what we said on COVID," and there's even lawsuits that are starting to happen now. I mean, Jay Bhattacharya, a prominent Stanford professor who was,
Yeah.
actually the perfect person for all this. He is a doctorate in both economics and I believe it's epidemiology.
He's a
Which
medical doctor. Yes, yes.
Yes, I mean
Yes.
it's like the perfect combination of stuff to look at. Hey, we're going to try and follow this disease and the impact that it's going to have, these choices on the economy. And yeah, they tried to silence him during
Yes.
all this. The emails between Fauci and Collins saying, "Hey, we got to shut this guy down," and he wasn't going along with the narrative. So, anyways, I just wanted to give you guys a chance to, I guess, talk just a little bit about this and kind of some of our thoughts looking in the rearview mirror on some of this COVID stuff.
Well, the case that you brought up about the woman in Iowa, I mean, I think that was just medical incompetence, quite frankly. The woman, seriously, I mean, I know it was tragic, right? Because the woman did end up, she died even after she was taken from the funeral home. She ended up dead. I mean, God rest her soul. So that was just incompetence. Okay, honestly, that's how it appeared to me. But this stuff about COVID, some of this stuff I think is quite criminal, quite frankly. I think the medical community became political. They really became political, and they start making a bunch of pronouncements, especially the CDC and Fauci and company, and start making pronouncements that were not only wrong in retrospect, they were wrong at the time they made it, and they knew it was. Like this case you just raised here about Jay Bhattacharya, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Fauci and company was doing everything to shut this man down and to shut down other people who were proposing, even shutting down people who were talking about hydroxychloroquine, which seemed like a very effective therapy for COVID. And they didn't want people to be using it. All over the media, we having these so-called experts, just like you're talking about, these experts telling us about the dangers of hydroxychloroquine, even though this is something that
you mean the horse paste? Is that what you're talking about?
No, that's ivermectin. Ivermectin was that's the other one too.
Okay.
Yeah, that's ivermectin. Yes, and they were all over the media telling us how dangerous these things are, how horrible these things are, when it was all a lie, and they knew it was a lie at the time. Some of this stuff is criminal, and some of these people should be prosecuted. I really hope they are. I mean, the case in Iowa, I mean, is incompetence. I mean, maybe there might be some lawsuits about that and that kind of stuff. But I don't think there was criminal intent there. But in this stuff, in the COVID, there was clearly criminal intent involved in some of this. Seriously.
Well, I wish you were right, but in California, it's going to be criminal to go against these top-down central planning experts.
Actually, I think
if
Tim,
anybody's going to
be has just given a stay on that or something. Right. I'm not sure that some federal judge has jumped in, but I'm not sure if the whole thing is nuked yet or not. I'm not. Yeah. But anyways, go ahead.
They'll keep trying. But So if anybody's going to be jailed in the future, in my humble opinion, it will be these the people that are speaking that want to, they're looking after their patients and have a difference of opinion. Gosh, got a difference of opinion. Can't have that. Better throw them in jail, right? Or whatever. They're not going to throw them in jail, but they're going to take away their license to practice medicine in California. Pardon me.
Well, Thomas, as a DA, all this talk of throwing people in jail must be just putting you on the edge of your seat.
Yeah, I don't make those jokes. But, my takeaway from this is that people need to stay in their lane. The scientific community, the medical community, I think there are scientists out there, there are doctors out there who are trying to find the truth, gather proper data, reach the right conclusions. But that's a different responsibility than policy making. And yes, just because there are ways to mitigate the spread of a disease, And you can show scientifically with some degree of certainty that certain policy steps would mitigate the spread of a disease. That doesn't by itself mean those steps should be taken. Those have to be counterbalanced against other considerations. And that's the role of policymakers, not doctors or scientists. I mean, what we've experienced here in Iowa, when we shut down for the pandemic, DHS, Department of Human Services, stopped doing in-home visits where we knew there were problems in families, and we shut down the schools and kids weren't going to school. And now as a prosecutor, I'm dealing with cases, and this isn't just me, this is statewide, across the state. Children were being physically or sexually abused during those periods of isolation. And now prosecutors in Iowa have to prosecute those cases because social workers weren't going into the homes. Teachers weren't seeing these students on a daily basis. So you have to weigh those costs and the cost to mental health. We know that there was increased depression and anxiety among children. We know that gun violence increased. It can be traced to these pandemic policies. So it's the role of the policymaker to weigh the costs and benefits of various mitigation efforts. And too many people on the left said, no, we should just bow down to the medical community. And that exceeded their role, and policymakers should not have deferred to medical people in the way they did.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the science just gives us sort of the framework and the metrics maybe to make our decisions with, but the decisions have to do with values, and
Yes.
the science doesn't really, impact the values so much.
Exactly right.
So, and that's quite frankly why it's so sad that they did so much to shut down Jay Bhattacharya, because that's one of those people who recognized that, being both a doctorate in economics and in the science. So,
yeah, and not to mention they shut down the other two major founders of the Great Barrington Declaration. There's two other very notable physicians besides Dr. Bhattacharya, and so it's not just him; it's a bunch of other people too.
Yeah, pretty much anybody who was not with the narrative. But Tim, this has us good and triggered. So you want to blast us through a quick session of good guys with guns?
Beginning to think if it wasn't for my special segment here, I wouldn't have much to say.
James
couldn't get a word in edgewise. But here we go. Yeah, so an armed mom and a security guard stop attempted child stealing in a Des Moines skywalk. This is actually in January of this year. So the skywalk may be nearly empty, but the doors are open from morning to night. Everyone's welcome to be here, says security guard Will Hunter. This is a public space, and I respect that. Hunter's job with Per Mars Security is to keep the public space a peaceful one. It's not easy. We do have the shelter down here, and you have a lot of mental illness in the homeless community, he says, and that's just a sad fact. Last week, 2 people walked repeatedly in front of the Hubble Tower Apartments door. Manager Shay Lindberg, her young child at her side, finally opened it, asking if there was a problem. One of the people grabbed her child. A struggle ensued, but Lindberg was armed. This is what I like about these kind of stories. Sergeant Paul Perazek of the Des Moines Police Department says this is one example of a lawfully possessed gun doing something well. I don't know if I agree with the gun doing anything well here. I don't like this focus on the gun. But anyway, the woman with the gun, the mother, the mama bear, she did a good job. It certainly looks like the big turning point here, the pivotal piece to keeping her child safe. Oh, really? Was the fact that she was lawfully armed with a handgun, and she produced it and told them, "Let go of my kid." The man and woman suddenly had other places to go, so they walked off, and Lindbergh called Will Hunter. It took Shay about 3 sentences to describe her, the person that grabbed her kid, and I'm like, that's Lori. She's been around, hanging around, says Hunter. They take name, this security company takes name of names of people with problems on the skywalk. So I'm going to kind of paraphrase. So the security guy followed the couple, kept an eye on him, brought the police to arrest him, and so on and so forth. And they couldn't get any. Shay Lindbergh did not want to respond to the questions that they had for her. The lady with the mama bear with the gun. I don't blame her. Best not to say much, when you're pulling a gun out on someone. And so I don't blame her in that regard. But anyway, here we are. Once again, nobody got hurt. Not a shot was fired. It's not going to make the local news. This is not going to be known anywhere but right here at the Knuckleheads of Liberty.
What a plug. What a plug, Tim.
Okay. Well, it's always good to hear, some people exercising their Second Amendment in a good way.
Yes, indeed.
So, yeah, I can't think of anything more. Anybody else have anything on that before we get to the final point of the show, the Knucklehead Noise Patrol? Okay. Okay. Well, let's jump into that because that's related to Iowa this time too. So in Iowa, it looks like the DNC has told Iowa they're too white, so get to the back of the primary bus because they've decided that they want to prioritize race. And this is literally what the DNC chairman said, Jaime Harrison. He said, this calendar, talking about the primary calendar change, this calendar does what is long overdue. It puts black voters at the front of the process in South Carolina. So now I don't have any particular horse in the race or anything else myself, but and the idea of which state is in front seems kind of, arbitrary. But the bottom line is to be making the decision on race is just kind of just seems to be totally going in the wrong direction. But what do you guys think?
Why don't we let the man from Iowa whose state is most affected tell us first?
Well, I suspect there's more than race going on, but that's how they're packaging it to try to appeal to a certain constituency whose votes they're trying to get. I mean, the Democrats absolutely botched the last caucus season. I mean, it was embarrassing for the state of Iowa. As I had the opportunity to tell some of you off air, if they can't run a caucus, how can you expect them to run the country? It was just a fiasco. And so that's what I think provided the initial opportunity for the Democratic Party to rethink where they should start. I think the caucus system is a great process. Unlike a primary system where you just go in and vote, in a caucus, you actually have to meet with your neighbors and deliberate over who would be the best candidate for office. And then you break out into groups and you count heads. It's a very democratic, small d democratic process that encourages deliberation and civic engagement. So I think it's a wonderful process. But the Democrats want to move away from it and want to move to a primary system for a kind of privileged primary states for a number of reasons that may or may not be valid. But I think they're just packaging it as a race issue right now to appeal to certain segments of their coalition.
Tim, you want to go?
No, you're muted, Tim. Tim, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Leon.
Oh, okay. Well, Thomas, I guess you're being very charitable to the Democrats, but I am not, okay? Because they are nothing but a bunch of racists. That is what they are. So I'm sorry to say that, but that is what I've said on this show before, and I'll say it again. I don't know if you remember in the last presidential cycle, Joe Biden, who was losing at the time, said we haven't yet heard from our most loyal voters or black voters, and he was talking about the voters in South Carolina, but the black voters in South Carolina. Listen to what he said. Loyal, listen to that. Loyal, like we are loyal to a king. That's what it sounds like. And these people have been trying since slavery to make black people into infants and dependent upon the Democratic Party. And these people are so disgusting that I want to vomit every time I hear about some of these policies that they are trying to institute. Now look at this thing here. Look at this thing. They want to change their whole order of things. Well, they're a private organization. Fine, I have no problem with that fact. But they want to change the whole order. For what? The order of the primaries. For what? Only because of race and only to help that racist in the White House, Joe Biden. He have a long history of that. He really does. we could spend all day talking about his racist rants and statements, but they're doing it only to satisfy him, to rig the system, to try and get him to be reelected at some point in time. God, I hope not. I hope he resigns before we get to the end of his term. But Jesus Lord, these people are sick. That's what they are. So I'm not as charitable as you, Thomas. You can be. God bless you for that. But I don't see them that way.
And I ain't touching that with a 10-foot pole. That's a good way to end.
Well, yeah, definitely. We've seen a lot of focus on identity politics, but we've reached the end of our show. I'd like to thank Thomas so much for joining us. We always want to hear from people who are libertarians, who are out there making a difference, out there running or achieving office, so they can tell us their stories and maybe get you, if you're watching, excited about trying to make a difference for liberty as well. We just interviewed Thomas as well on a recent show. And James, could you bring up the visual real quick? Again, here's Thomas's webpage, so you can check him out. He is the Greene County attorney in Iowa, and he is also has a book too that you can check out called Pliny Defense of Empire. So thanks again, Thomas, for joining us, and
Thank you for having me.
Until the next one, stay free.
Yes,
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thomas, thanks a lot. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.